In the summer of 1959, well into President Eisenhower's second term in office, the average cost of a new home was $12,400. And the average wage earner that year brought home just over $5,000. For an average of $2,200, you could buy a new car, and for a mere 25 cents a gallon, you could keep that new car filled at a decent cost. A postcard was 3 cents, and a first-class postage stamp was 4 cents. For a quarter, you could buy a loaf of bread, and for $1, ladies, you could buy a pair of nylons. And everyone could go to the Lamar Theater and get a ticket to the latest movie in town. In September, the class of 1963, led by its president, Joel Fitzgerald, began its 4-year journey through many profound experiences and wonderful memories. The Arthur Knights football team that season compiled a 5-3 record with 2 memorable shutout victories, hammering Newman 68-0 and then beating Oakland 26-0 at homecoming. Your freshman class float titled "The Least We Can Do" was judged the best in the homecoming parade. Your homecoming attendants that freshman year were Susan Pate and Ronnie Jergens. Your first semester featured the excitement of leaving junior high behind for the new experience of being in high school, changing classes and classrooms more often than ever before. You got accustomed to attending football and basketball games featuring hard-working Arthur Knight teams, and going to sock hops where the girls danced with each other on the fast songs and the guys got out on the floor for the slow songs. Some things, they never change. Network television continued to improve, with NBC's Western series Bonanza becoming the first ever weekly series broadcast in color. The old black and white format, however, was perfect for 2 other new shows that October: Rod Serling's Twilight Zone and The Untouchables. In December, The Wizard of Oz was shown on TV for the first time, and ratings were so high that the show was telecast annually from then on. At the post-game sock hops, ballads such as the Fleetwood's Mr. Blue and Put Your Head on My Shoulder by Paul Anka were slow dance favorites. Meanwhile, the jukebox at Moses Cafe played such hits as Johnny Horton's The Battle of New Orleans and Bobby Darin's Mac the Knife, which topped the charts for 9 weeks.
Oh, the shark bites with his teeth there, and he shows them pearly white, but a jackknife is old Mackie's babe, but it keeps it out of sight. Now when that shark bites with his teeth there, scarlet billows start to spread, but white blood's on old Mackie's babe. So there's never a trace of red. Did you hear about Louis Miller? He disappeared, babe. I have to draw it out, all his hard-earned cash. And now Mackie spends just like a sailor. Could it be a boy's done something rash? Oh, Jenny Diver, oh, Suki Tawdry,
Throughout the winter, the entire school and the town were excited by the success of Coach Brim's basketball Knights, who won the Okaw Valley Conference Championship that season, Arthur's first such title in 14 years. That team compiled an impressive 20-4 record overall, going 10-1 in conference play, with that lone blemish being a 1-point loss to Arcola. Freshman members of the JV squad that season were Phil Beachy, Dave Crispin, Dick Hine, Larry Jones, and Randy Vogel. In Hollywood, Ben-Hur won 11 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, a record number of Oscars that would last for 38 years. By that spring of 1960, your class had also discovered just why Arthur High School's well-known music program, under the direction of Mrs. Margaret Dixon and Mr. Willis Smith, was the place to be for so many talented musicians and singers back then. Belonging to the band or the chorus was truly something special, and as is the case today, enjoyed solid community support. During your time in high school, the band and choruses won sweepstakes and contests all 4 years. The Everly Brothers hit the top of the charts in men with this rousing tune.
Don't want to love anymore. Don't want your kisses, that's for sure. I die each time I hear this sound. Here he comes, that's Kathy's clown. You know you gotta stand tall, because a man can't crawl. But when he knows you're telling lies and he lets them pass him by, he's not a man at all. Don't want your love anymore. Don't want your kisses, that's for sure. I die each time I hear this sound. Here he comes, that's Kathy's clown. When you see me shed a tear, and you know that it's sincere, well, don't you think it's kind of sad that you're treating me so bad? Or don't you even care? Don't want your love anymore. Don't want your kisses, that's for sure. I die each time I hear this sound. Here he comes, that's Kathy's clown. That's Kathy's clown. That's Kathy's clown. That's Kathy's clown.
The decade of the 60s began to make news that spring for a number of reasons. On May 1st, an American U-2 reconnaissance aircraft was shot down by the Soviet Union, and the pilot, Francis Gary Powers, was taken prisoner. Less than a week later, President Eisenhower signed the Civil Rights Act of 1960 into law. On the 4th of July, the new 50-star flag made its debut in Philadelphia, celebrating Hawaii's designation as our 50th state. Later that same month, the Republicans and Democrats each selected their respective presidential nominee, Vice President Richard Nixon and Senator John F. Kennedy. Mr. Nixon came to Sullivan, and many Arthur people went there to see him take part in a parade. In popular music, Elvis Presley was once again on top of the heap with this song, adapted from an Italian classic, O Sole Mio. AFS student Yvette Barbier of Switzerland arrived that summer and moved in with the Charles Collins family. Randy Bogle took the president's gavel from Joel Fitzgerald and would lead your class for the next 2 years. Randy and Susan Collins were your homecoming attendants that year, which was undoubtedly the highlight event of the weekend, given the Knights' 32-0 loss to Newman at the game. The football team struggled to a disappointing 1-7 season record, the lone victory coming over Lovington in the season opener. As the basketball season got underway, our nation went to the polls and elected its youngest president, John F. Kennedy. The race was so close that Kennedy won the popular vote by just under 113,000 votes, or 0.1% of all votes cast. During the 1960-61 basketball season, the Arthur Five won but a single game that season, beating Atwood at the Monticello Holiday Tournament. Sophomores who played on that varsity team that year were Phil Beachy, Randy Bogle, Dave Crispin, Roger Hart, and Larry Jones. The JV squad was led by Kenny Byers, Joel Fitzgerald, Larry Howe, Ronnie Juergens, Roger Shockley, and Dick Weatherall. The good news was you still got to enjoy the fun of sock hops after those challenging games, dancing to ballads like this one. Into his presidency, President Kennedy gave the first live press conference and talked of the changes he hoped to make in terms of enhancing America's reputation in the world. That March, he established the Peace Corps in the hopes of spreading American goodwill throughout the world. On May 5th, though, Americans were thrilled when Alan Shepard of the Mercury 7 astronauts became the first American in space, and President Kennedy announced his goal of putting a man on the moon before the end of the decade. Back then, many Arthur students of all ages would arise very early in the morning, school day or not, and watch the launches of the Mercury astronauts' flights into space on TV in black and white, as there was no color coverage at the time. Later that same month, JFK sent 400 American Green Beret special advisors to South Vietnam to train South Vietnamese soldiers in methods of counterinsurgency in the fight against Viet Cong guerrillas, an important development that would soon become more ominous over time. Arthur High's third AFS student, George Comont of Uruguay, arrived before school started and lived with the Chester Martin family. First semester of your junior year started against the backdrop of the recently completed Berlin Wall, and it was clear that the Cold War was in full flower, with the Iron Curtain having become an established fact. How many of you in the years after high school traveled to West Germany to see the Berlin Wall or to go through Checkpoint Charlie and tour East Germany? Well, the Knights' football frustrations continued that fall as the team posted a 1-7 record, but did win the homecoming game against Oakland, which was a 13-12 hard-fought victory for the Arthur squad. What's more, though, your class float won the parade competition with a skeleton motif entitled It's Friday for the Oaks. Your homecoming attendants that year were Alice Key and Joel Fitzgerald. Your junior class play was entitled Deadly Earnest, and it featured 29 of your classmates participating in it. The basketball season showed the team making marked improvement, winning 7 more games than the previous year. The squad featuring solid performances by Phil Beachy, Kenny Byers, Randy Bogle, Dave Crispin, Roger Hart, Dick Hine, and Larry Jones from your class won its first 4 games and its last 3 of the regular season, finishing with an 8-12 overall record. George Kumont, the AFS student, also played on that team. And that same month, 4 unknown guys from New Jersey hit the charts with their first record. Well, around that March time frame, 4 of your more enterprising classmates, Ronnie Juergens, Larry Howell, Bob Woods, and Joel Fitzgerald, needed a science experiment. And since race relations were in the news back then, they decided to raise some chickens of color to see if they were treated differently by the normal chickens. That intrepid quartet of young scientists put an egg incubator in the darkroom of Mrs. Scott's science lab, got some fertile eggs, and injected food coloring in the air bubble end of most of the eggs. They faithfully checked on the eggs every morning, and finally, on Easter morning, no less after sunrise service, they discovered that they had hatched. And they were excited to find red, blue, green, and yellow chicks along with some normal ones. After a while, of course, they became too big and messy to keep at the school, so the scientific fearsome foursome took them to a farm owned by J.D. and Ann Campbell's family. However, 3 days later, when your classmates went back to check on them, the colored chicks were nowhere to be found. However, upon further examination, they discovered some little colored feathers on the snout of some hogs. As they doubtlessly put in their report to Mrs. Scott, they didn't know what the normal chickens thought of the chickens of color, but the hogs thought they were delicious. I'm just reading this. In May, you closed out your junior year by putting on a terrific prom for the class of '62 titled Paradise Cruise, which the yearbook called the most beautiful prom ever. The summer of 1962 was spent cruising around town listening to the latest tunes on WLS in Chicago. The guys in your class would drive around or walk the streets profiling in their varsity club letter jackets, and everyone wore their class rings with pride or exchanged them with their significant other. The girls would use Angora yarn to wrap around the boys' rings and change the color of the yarn almost every day. The guys would wear the girls' rings on their left pinky finger if it fit, or they would wear it on a chain around their neck. Remember this classic young love tune heard often on WLS?
Down, 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 down. Come down, down, down. Come down, down, down. Breaking up is hard to do. Don't take your love away from me. Don't you think my heart is hungry? If you know that I'll be blue, 'cause breaking up is hard to do. Remember when you held me tight and you kissed me all through the night. Think of all that we've been through, 'cause breaking up is hard to do. They say that breaking up is hard to do. Now I know that it's true. Don't say that this is the end. Instead of breaking up, I wish that we were making up again. I beg of you, don't say goodbye. Can we give another try? Come on, baby, let's start anew. 'Cause breaking up is hard to do. Down, down, down. Come down, 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 down. Come down, down, down. Breaking up is hard to do.
Well, late that summer, your class welcomed its own AFS student in Arthur Choirboys, Sven Birger Ekengren of Sweden, who lived with Dr. Grant Jones and Everett Fitzgerald families. After your final high school summer, Randy Bogle gave the reins of your class presidency back to Joel Fitzgerald, who would go on to have a terrific senior year. Though a winless 1962 football season was disappointing, there was clearly talent among the seniors, as 5 of them were singled out for postseason honors. Team captain Dick Hine made second team all-conference. Kenny Byers and Dave Crispin both made honorable mention all-conference, while Carl Sparks and Phil Beachy received special mention all-conference. Your classmate Birger likes to remember his brief football career this way. He said, quote, "I was, of course, curious about American football and joined preseason practice totally unaware of what it was really about. Just to dress up in a helmet and a full suit was rather strange, I thought. The temperature was rather high, in particular for a Swede, not being used to anything over 90 degrees. So I ran out onto the field and soon fainted from a heat shock. Someone had to help me back into the locker room, and that was the end of my football career in total." Randy Bogle was your homecoming king that fall, and Phyllis Boyd was his queen. Your homecoming attendants were Lynn Asherman and Dave Crispin. Your senior class play, entitled "A Boy Named Beulah Was a Hoot." It featured Ronnie Juergens taking a huge fall on stage at the hands of Carol Watkins. That may have been the reason that Ronnie later became a farmer instead of an actor. On the world stage, however, the last 2 weeks of October had everyone riveted to their TV sets and radios during the Cuban Missile Crisis, as the tense standoff between the Soviet Union and the United States brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. Fortunately, on October 28th, Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev announced the removal of the Soviet missile bases in Cuba. Basketball season provided some exciting games both at home and on the road. The team finished with a 16-7 overall record and won the Monticello Holiday Tournament, beating both the hosts and Rantoul en route to the title. In January, an exciting one-point overtime defeat of Tuscola briefly gave the Knights the top spot in the Okaw Valley Conference. It was that kind of season. The standouts from that team were Dave Crispin, Larry Jones, Roger Hart, Phil Beachy, and Randy Bowl. Musically, doo-wop was still alive as the Tokens, a black group out of Philadelphia, released this million-seller tune.
We stroll along together, holding hands, walking all alone. So in love are we two that we don't know what to do. So in love are you and I, as we walk by the sea together, under stars twinkling high above. So in love are we two, no one else but me for you. So in love are you and I, so in love, so much in love, we stroll along together. I need you so much. I love you, my darling. Can't you tell in my touch as we walk down the aisle together? We will vow to be together till we die. So in love are we two, just can't wait to say I do. So in love are you and I, so in love, so much in love, so in love, so in love.
In March, the Alcatraz Island Federal Penitentiary was closed by the order of U.S. Attorney General Robert Kennedy, the President's brother. And if you've never had that opportunity to visit that island, by all means, you should do so. It is quite a prison, and it gives you a very different view of San Francisco. As your senior year progressed, you started thinking about college, life after high school, and what happens next in general. It was a time when you began to realize just how good your teachers were and how fortunate you were to have them. It's a sure bet that those feelings have only gotten stronger as these past 5 decades have unfolded. Teachers like Mrs. Baker, Mr. Bogle, Mrs. Dixon, Mr. Harris, Mrs. McCord, Mrs. Scott, Mrs. Schumann, Mr. Smithley, Mr. Sisler, Mrs. Sisler, Mr. Skelton, and Mr. Smith inspired you to work harder, while Mr. Mosier provided you with solid guidance for shaping your future. You finished your last year of high school with a terrific prom put on for you by the class of '64, and a wonderful senior trip to our nation's capital. Diane Brock was going steady with Ronnie Decker, and she wrote a letter to him on the bus. As your bus passed through a small town somewhere along the way, she leaned out the window and handed her letter to a mailman who was in his mail truck at a stoplight. During the trip, you saw the movie Lawrence of Arabia with Peter O'Toole. And even though your class had saved enough money to continue on to New York City, the school leadership said no. What a disappointment for you. You had many outstanding students in your class. Joel Fitzgerald was your valedictorian. And Larry Jones was your class salutatorian. Phyllis Boyd and Randy Bogle were the DAR and SAR honoree, respectively. Sharon Craig attended Girls State, while Carl Sparks, a native of Melbourne, Australia, and Randy Bogle, born in Fiji, were selected to attend Illinois Boys State. Those two guys went on to great things militarily. Randy became the first person from Arthur High School to attend and graduate from the United States Naval Academy. He was commissioned, became an aviator, served on active duty for 30 years, and was the Naval Academy's Commandant of Midshipmen in one of his final assignments. Carl had 27 years service in the Army, active and reserve, during which he was awarded both the Purple Heart and Bronze Star. He also had a stellar 25-year career as a civil engineer in the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Several of your classmates served with distinction in the military during the Vietnam conflict. Carl Sparks, Dave Crispin, Dick Hine, Ron Jerkins, Randy Bogle, Joel Fitzgerald, Roger Hart, and Bob Woods. And so it was that after 4 eventful, historic, and memory-filled years, and a never-to-be-forgotten high school career, you, the class of 1963, donned your caps and gowns to signify the completion of the initial academic phase of your life's journey. Your class photo took its rightful place on the wall, out in the hall, near the principal's office, and you immediately began your post-high school adventures, ever mindful of the benefit of the start you'd been given. In keeping with your class motto, we have reached the foothills, the mountains lie ahead. Your class flower was a white rose, symbolic of purity, and your class colors were blue and white. It's been said that during graduation practice, there were those of you who seemed to act differently, and perhaps not as friendly as they had been during their school years. As yours had been an extremely close group, some of you found that difficult to understand. Only years later did you realize that that was your way of handling the goodbyes, the parting from one another. It was a grieving period that you didn't fully comprehend at the time. Now, you do. To honor the members of this year's golden anniversary class, the Choir Boys will now pay you one final vocal tribute with one of the 4 freshmen's greatest hits about one of your greatest moments.
It's a time for joy, a time for tears, a time we'll treasure through the years. We'll remember always graduation day. At the senior prom we danced till 3, and there you gave your heart to me. We'll remember always graduation day. Though we live in sorrow, all the joys we've known, we can face tomorrow. No